welcome to Macros with Mythili, our weekly half-hour program where we take a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and challenges before the country. One issue that's also a major challenge is GST, the much-acclaimed goods and service tax on which we have so much hope riding. How it will do away with a multitude of taxes, create only one common market, improve competitiveness, raise GDP, etc., etc. Well, after months, if not years of stop-go developments, we're finally seeing light at the end of the tunnel. The government is all set to bring the GST bill to Parliament in the ongoing winter session. Even assuming the bill is passed, a big if in itself, is it going to be smooth sailing in the coming days? Are there any wrinkles that still need to be ironed out? Are we ready on the ground for the new tax regime? What are the pitfalls that we need to watch out for? To discuss all this and much more, we've got some of the best brains on GST for you. Kavita Rao, Professor NIPFP and author of numerous reports on GST. Sheila Sangwan, former member CBEC, the Central Board of Excise and Customs, and Vivek Mishra, Head of Indirect Tax Practice at PwC. Welcome to the show. Sheila, if I might start with you, as somebody who has just been with government all along, how do you view GST? Is it all that it's made out to be? And how ready are we on the ground, even assuming the constitutional bill does get passed?
See, the thinking underlying the GST is acceptable to everybody. The centre, the states, all the stakeholders are willing to go along with this. I think it's a major change which will take care of the cascading of taxes. And I think there is an agreement amongst the centre and the states that we need to move to GST. There have been issues which have been agitating the states individually and collectively. And I think the centre has tried to accommodate almost all the issues on which they feel accommodation is possible. Over the years, I think I have been seeing these discussions for the past 6-7 years now. The centre has yielded, and I think a stage has come when all the states feel that yes, it is now time that we move on to GST if we have to take care of this cascading of taxes. And I can see that the present government has the political will, and I can see that we may make a move towards GST perhaps in the next couple of years.
Vivek, before the show, you said you were a little skeptical about all the talk of progress on GST. Can you tell us why you're still skeptical?
I think there are two issues. One is the amendment to the Constitution, and the other is primarily the place of supply rules, or by whatever name they're called, the rules for taxation of services. One is that the constitutional amendment, which is supposed to be passed in Parliament in the current winter session, we'll have to wait and see as to when it will be passed, because this is the biggest hurdle, and you need to have everyone behind the new law for this amendment to take place. So if it happens in the winter session, that's great, but I would not bet on it happening in the current winter session.
Because the government doesn't have the numbers in the Rajya Sabha in any case to begin with.
Right, and not only that, GST obviously in replacing excise duty, sales tax, etc., it's not a minor reform at all. So we would expect that the states would get comfortable with GST. It seems to me, if they have a lot of data on it and they can see that it's going to improve their finances and be a more robust tax in the current lot of indirect taxes.
Kavita, where do you stand on this? Sheila is very optimistic, Vivek less so. Where do you stand? Somewhere in between?
I think the country is reasonably positioned to go ahead with the reforms. I'm not too worried about it getting passed in Parliament or not, because in the ultimate analysis, a law becomes a law only after it's passed by the Parliament. And I don't think the present government would find it very difficult to get it ratified by the states, since you require half the states to ratify it. What I do think is, going forward after the bill is actually passed, a constitutional amendment takes place, that's when some of the big challenges will arise, and I don't think we have seen the last of the challenges so far as GST implementation is concerned.
Can you just list out what are the major challenges that you have in mind after the act is passed?
Two things. The first, which everybody seems to be talking about a lot, is at what rate will GST be implemented. And while there has been some discussion about 27% and stuff like that as being endorsed by the empowered committee and so on, I think ultimately it is more a political decision as to what rate it will be implemented at. And if we are implementing at visibly high rates, as in perceptibly high rates being registered on bills, then getting people to ask for bills and being compliant might be an issue. It is true that we are collecting the same kinds of taxes today as a GST regime would collect. So implicitly we are collecting like 12.5% of CEN-VAT, and we are collecting 13, 14, 15% of state VATs and CST hidden along the way. So the implicit taxes would be in the same order, but if you make it an explicit tax, sometimes people find it a little more, little less happy with it, little less willing to comply. The second issue that I can see coming up is there is still a lot of lack of clarity on whether you're going to have single administration, dual administration. I think I'm wrong. We have clarity that we'll have two administrations, and two administrations obviously increase compliance costs, and at some point the average dealer on the street is going to figure that out. I don't think they have figured it out yet. And that, I think, is where the next big challenge for GST is going to come from.
Sheila, Kavita raised two issues, one on the revenue neutral rate, whether it's going to be too high, and the second on dual tax administrations. If I can direct the second to you, since you're familiar with tax administration, how difficult does it become if you have dual tax, the center and the state levying tax on the same base?
See, tax administration is not a very pleasant job, as all of us know. And I think all of us don't want to visit the taxman or have him visit us. So if you have dual control and you have the state as well as the center administering any tax, anybody who is the subject of this levy is not going to be very happy with it. There has been a lot of thinking that you can have one return to both the center and the states vis-a-vis a particular item where they're going to have dual control. And I think this has probably found acceptance across the states and the center, that you don't, then you have online audit, so that you don't have interface, These kind of acceptable methods of dealing with this problem, I think, are the right way to go. And you can't have the person visit, one visiting from the center, one visiting from the state for the same issues. I think there is acceptance that if we have online audit and we have common returns, it should take care of the problem.
Except that will require states to give up some of their sovereignty. Would they be willing to do that?
Overall, GST does require states giving up quite a bit and center giving up simultaneously. So I think there has to be acceptance of the fact that if you want to move towards GST, then you have to give up something.
So there has to be some give and take. But I'm afraid on that note, we have to slip into a very short break. But please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're discussing the much-awaited GST. Vivek, before the break, Kavita said there were two major issues with GST. One is about the dual tax administration, which Sheila dealt with, and the other was what she talked about, the tax rate. The empowered committee suggested 27%, whereas earlier the rates that were being bandied about was only about 18%. How significant is it, and will it become very difficult to make people comply when the rate on paper seems so high?
Certainly, if the rate on paper seems high, then people will have a perception that the tax is onerous, which today they may not have, because the rates are not applied in one shot on a given transaction. But I think that we are discussing issues at this point which are easy to grasp, and it's easy to have an opinion. I think the most complex issue is the taxation of services and the set of rules which are used to determine which state has the authority to tax a particular service. So I think that's going to be the issue that's going to take up a lot of time and be debated for a significant amount of time without any clear-cut answers once the taxation of services rules are published.
What you call the place of supply rules, but can you just elaborate what exactly is the issue there?
The issue is that as long as you have a transaction which is carried out in one state, like telecoms for example, as long as it's in one state, there's no problem. But for example, people, just using this telecoms example, people buy prepaid SIM cards. And the tax has to be collected when they make the transaction, and then a person could roam, particularly in NCR, in 3 states. So how will the tax be collected for each of the states? You can't just have the states say, okay, if he bought the SIM card in state 1, then that's fine, and we'll forego our revenue. I mean, this is just a very, very simple example. So there's going to be a huge amount of complexity on a state-by-state taxation of services.
Yeah, Sheila, you had something to...
Even today, we have had issues with telephone services, you know, and I think he has a point there. But even today, some of these disputes have been resolved by way of clarifications. Now, for example, anybody using a mobile and traveling out of this country, going abroad, now you're going to continue to enjoy this, and there's going to be a server linked up somewhere through which you're going to continue to enjoy this mobile. There have been disputes as to who should pay the tax, where it should be levied. Should it be levied here? Should it be not levied here? And we've had clarifications on these issues. So I do see that these are services particularly, there are going to be a lot of disputes, but I don't see these disputes not getting resolved.
But we'll have to case by case, or can you lay down some uniform rules? Because case by case is always dangerous.
The place of supply rules, even today, they are under discussion, and I'm told there is a consensus on most issues. There are few which people have not yet agreed to, but I don't see these as being unresolved. At best, what would happen? You could always say a certain percentage of this you can retain, a certain percentage goes to the general pool or goes to the other state. However, they are resolved. Don't forget that the other side will be facing a similar situation as you are facing vis-a-vis most such services which may be need for clarification on these. So I don't see these as unresolvable problems, and ultimately the GST Council can take a view, a comprehensive view, with all the states sitting in with the finance minister there. So these are not unresolvable disputes. Even today we have huge issues on the place of supply rules which were introduced very recently. So I don't see this as major problems.
Kavita, how do you see that? Has NIPFP and have you and NIPFP done any work on place of supply rules?
Long ago we tried to sort of talk about it a little, but we haven't worked at length about it. But I think I would agree with Sheila in the sense I don't see them becoming a hurdle in the implementation. They are like a snag which needs to be resolved. There will be states which will bicker about them, but it is possible, it should be possible to bring them on board, because I've sort of been to some of these discussions, and there's a little nitpicking going on, and for the most part I think people are willing to come to a consensus on that. So trade and industry will have issues in how they get defined and how they will get better clarity. So that that's a process that will happen only after the tax comes into place and we are trying to figure out all the little details. But for the states and the centre to agree to go ahead with GST, I don't think place of supply rules will become a major hurdle.
Sheila, as far as VAT was concerned, if you look at how we progressed towards VAT, it took a long time. Similarly with GST, but if we were to compare our state of readiness at the time today as far as GST is concerned vis-a-vis VAT, how far are we really in terms of complete preparedness on the grassroots level?
I think I would agree with Vivek when he said that we don't have preparedness. Some of the states in terms of IT infrastructure and automation are really not prepared today, and unfortunately over the past 5 years when I've been seeing these discussions taking place, I have not really seen a perceptible improvement in their preparedness over the past 5 years. I think we are expecting that the GSTN will do a bit of hand-holding and take them along, but the initiative has to come from the state if they are wanting to come in along with the rest of the states. Like, I think they've categorized them into A, B and C. The A are the really advanced states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka. These are perhaps the most advanced states in terms of automation and IT preparedness. And the B category, I can see them also being able to move. But UP, Bihar and the northeast states, which I think in the C category by and large, I can see that they would have problems unless they do a fast track move immediately, and GSTN does serious hand holding, and I think GSTN should do it, because GSTN has been set up by the center actually, even though it's a private entity. The funding has gone in from the center, and I think they should be asked, they should be tasked to do this so that this move is smooth.
Well, it's almost time for us to slip into a break, but very briefly, if I can ask you, like in the case of VAT, can we move ahead with GST in some states and the others joining later, or is a partial implementation not possible with GST?
We can move in, and I can see that when the other states see how it's working, like some states may have views that you don't know, it's an uncertainty, they don't know how much revenue they're going to be losing. So some states may want to withhold for a while and watch what's happening. But I don't see this happening. I can see that all the states may go along.
So you don't think piecemeal implementation is an issue. So I'm afraid on that note, we have to slip into another short break, but please do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and we're discussing the much-awaited GST bill and what it means for the country. Vivek, if I could ask you, the states have been making a huge demand about keeping petroleum and liquor out. Now, if petroleum is a big source of revenue, now if these two items, likewise liquor, if these two items are kept out, what kind of GST will that be? How meaningful will it be?
I think that the general view, which I agree with, is that GST, once it settles down, will be a much more transparent, robust, and a much better tax in many ways. So I think if petrol and diesel is kept out, I don't see that as something that makes it meaningless or anything like that. It would still be a great step forward, and we could look at petroleum products coming into the GST net sometime in the future. And liquor anyway, liquor and tobacco, these are supposed to be sin goods and are supposed to be heavily taxed. So I don't see a problem there. But I'd like to mention just one thing. As a transaction moves from one state to another, and let's say it's goods, currently there is a central sales tax that's levied. Under the GST scenario, the first state has to pass over all its tax revenues from that good to the second state, so that the second state can give a credit for taxes paid. I think that is something which we'll have to see how well that is calculated, because each state would be every month passing on a huge amount of revenues to theoretically 29 other states, and I think that's something that will take that will have to be very, very robust for it to happen automatically each month.
Absolutely. Kavita, input tax credit is one thing that's going to be a big, big bugbear. So what are the suggestions that somebody like you can give us on the issue of how does one solve this? A, input tax credit in general. Number two, when we have two different tax rates, one by the center and one by the states, two different tax administrations, how does one do the set-off? Can one set off for the state GST against the centers and vice versa? How does one get over this hurdle?
First, as far as interstate transactions are concerned, as far as I know, and things keep changing, so I might not really be having the last word on this. As far as I know, interstate transactions are to be taxed by the center, and the center is supposed to pass on the revenue to the importing state. So so every individual state trying to pass on revenue to every other individual state is not possibly a scenario that we need to worry about. So far as input tax credit is concerned, for the most part, any transactions within the state, everybody is taking credit. Every transaction or every tax is taking credit against itself. So state taxes are ITC works with state taxes, and central taxes ITC works with central taxes. The only issue comes up when you have interstate transactions, and they have tried to figure out an elaborate mechanism of trying to reduce cash flows and so on, but that I think is still evolving, so I am not very sure how exactly it is going to be spelt out, but from what I understand, it is the glitches or the difficulties will lie only in the case of interstate transactions, as to in what sequence they are allowed to take input tax credit. For all other taxes, it is a straightforward case of every tax being self-contained within itself.
Sheila, Kavita raised a very valid point. There is going to be the issue of compensation. As we've seen with central sales tax itself, the centre hasn't honoured its obligations really to compensate the states. I read somewhere that in fact there are huge pending amounts that the centre has not really paid to the states. So given this kind of trust deficit, will the states really be willing to go ahead when there will be major losers and winners in the GST transition?
See, you can't have indefinite compensation, unlimited time. And I think the centre is correct when it says that we didn't undertake to compensate you indefinitely. Well, having said that, I think if we have to move towards GST, perhaps the centre should come forward and take care of this compensation which is pending and lay down a timeline, maybe 3 years or 5 years, whichever is acceptable to both sides, and say that we are willing to compensate for this period of time. As I remember the numbers, they said that the additional tax revenue would be to the order of 94,000 crores, and they said the difference between what they're going to lose and what they're going to get was, I think, 56,000 crores, if I'm not mistaken. Now, that's a huge number. If you're going to have a revenue neutral rate, it bothers me where this kind of revenue is going to come from and how exactly the centre is going to deal with this compensation. I think we definitely need clarity on this. And as I remember again, petroleum and petroleum products contribute 48% of the total revenue. To keep that out of GST, completely out of GST, to me does not seem the right thing to do. And I think we should look at some way for this revenue to also be put, at least a major chunk of it, into the common kitty and get redistributed if we are talking serious business. On tobacco, I believe there has been a move to probably give 25% of the total revenue into the common kitty. Tobacco also, I think, contributes about 12% of the total revenue. So we could think of something, I think, on petroleum products as well, if we want to look at this in a more serious manner.
Vivek, it's almost time for us to wrap up, but I want to touch on one more point that we somehow omitted. This entire issue of threshold. What should the threshold be? 25 lakhs, 10 lakhs? How critical is it to have agreement, and how difficult is it to actually go ahead with 10 lakhs?
I don't think it's a big issue as far as the tax is concerned. But I think what's happening right now and has been happening for the last many years, there are 2-3 issues which are easy to grasp, and a lot of debate has been on these 2-3 issues, one of which is threshold. As one can visualize, the people who would be below the threshold, it's an administrative thing that we want to exclude them because we can't really administer the tax to so many people. But I don't think it's a very complex or a big issue in terms of the design of GST.
Kavita, it's some closing comments from you. What do you see as the biggest hurdles really in GST, and how hopeful are you? Do you have any deadline by which you think GST will definitely come into force?
No, I don't have a deadline. I am not in a position to give a deadline or formulate a deadline. I'm not too worried about petroleum products because if you bring petroleum into GST, you will bring the base and the tax that you're trying to collect from it, and that doesn't help you reduce the revenue neutral rate. If the government believes that the economy is going to do very well and you're going to hit a 7% growth very easily, then it makes sense to take a little risk and reduce the rate at which you will introduce GST to maybe 20%, and then take up the issue, the challenge of looking at revenues. It just might be that results in a little buoyancy which offsets the requirements. If you're looking at GST being implemented at 27%, I don't think you're looking at very major losses. Even with compensation of CST at 4%, you're looking at something like 20,000 crores. And given central government scale of things, that's not a very large number. So I'm not very worried about compensation being a very big issue. Although I would like to flag for you that there will be some states for whom it is not a transitional issue. So, central government washing its hands off by saying that, oh, it's transition, we compensate for 3 years and 5 years, may not be fair to some of the backward states which might be in a bit of a mess.
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have in this edition of Macros with Mythili on GST. Clearly, when it comes to GST, there's still many a slip between the cup and the lip. Thank you so much, Sheila, as well as Vivek, for joining me. Thank you also, Kavita. And thank you as well for watching. But we'll be back next week, same time, with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.